Dennis Bergkamp. A name that resonates as synonymous with class, intelligence, and refined technique. But before becoming an Arsenal legend, the Dutchman went through ups and downs that shaped his career. Our story begins in Amsterdam, where a young Bergkamp grew up under the influence of the Ajax school. Inspired by Johan Cruyff, he dominated the ball like few others. He made his debut for the first team in 1986, when he was just 17 years old. And it was there, at Ajax, that the world began to realize that there was something different about this boy. Between 1986 and 1993, Bergkamp shone for Ajax, scoring goals, winning titles, and becoming one of the best players in Europe. But his hunger for challenges took him to Italy, where he signed for Inter Milan. And that's where his career encountered its first major turbulence. At Inter, Bergkamp struggled. The defensive football of Serie A did not suit his style of play. The Italian fans and press were impatient. He, who was already known for his reserved manner, became even more withdrawn. 2 years of criticism, few goals, and the feeling that perhaps he wasn't all that they said he was. But great players always find a way. In 1995, a new challenge arose. An English club willing to take a chance on him, even after the fiasco in Italy. And so, Dennis Bergkamp landed in London to wear the Arsenal shirt. Little did the fans know that they were about to witness one of the greatest chapters in the history of football. When Dennis Bergkamp arrived at Arsenal in 1995, the Premier League was not yet the global spectacle we know it as today. English football was physical, direct, and often chaotic. Many doubted that this technical and refined Dutchman would be able to adapt. And the first few months were not easy. Bergkamp went 6 games without scoring, and the pressure began to mount. Another expensive foreigner who didn't work out, some critics said. But in the 7th game, against Southampton, he responded. 2 goals, pure class, and the first sign that London was about to see something special. But the real turning point came in 1996, with the arrival of Arsène Wenger. The French coach saw Bergkamp as the maestro of the team, the player who would transform Arsenal from a scrappy team into an attacking football machine. Under Wenger, the Dutchman found the freedom to create, to think, and to dominate the game with his touch of genius. It was during this time that Bergkamp began to build his legacy. He was no ordinary striker. It wasn't just the goals, although he scored many and some of the most beautiful ever seen. It was his vision of the game, his ability to control every movement to perfection. His touch on the ball was like a paintbrush on a canvas, drawing out plays that seemed impossible. And then came 1997. The hat-trick against Leicester City, one of the most spectacular in Premier League history. 3 goals, each one more beautiful than the last. One of them was a masterpiece, control with his chest, a delicate touch and a shot into the top corner. That was when there was no doubt left. Bergkamp had not only adapted to English football, he was redefining it. And that was just the beginning. The best was yet to come. If the late 90s had served to show that Dennis Bergkamp was a genius, the 2000s would prove that he was much more than that. He was a leader, a symbol of Arsenal, an architect of a team that would go down in history. In 1997-98, Bergkamp had perhaps his best season. He was the brains behind the Premier League and FA Cup wins, leading Arsenal to a historic double. He was voted England's best player and won the admiration of even his rivals. But what really marked that campaign was a goal. A goal that still defies football logic. Newcastle United, St. James Park. Bergkamp receives the ball from Pires on the edge of the box, with his back to defender De Bizes. In a magical touch, he turns the ball to one side and turns his body to the other. In a second, he is free, face to face with the goalkeeper. A soft touch and the ball is in the back of the net. The stadium goes silent. Not even the Newcastle fans could believe what they had just seen. Bergkamp was already a living legend at Arsenal by this point. But the best was yet to come. In 2001, a young French striker was establishing himself as a star at the club, Thierry Henry. And alongside him, Bergkamp would form one of the most lethal partnerships in the history of the Premier League. If Henry was the speed and the explosiveness, Bergkamp was the brain and the precision. Every pass was a gift. Every play, a spectacle. And together, they were about to lead an Arsenal that would forever mark its name in English football. that Invincibles team was on the horizon. And Bergkamp was ready to be part of the greatest season in the club's history. If ever a team was destined to make history, it was the 2003 to 2004 Arsenal team. And if ever a player could be the mastermind behind it, that player was Dennis Bergkamp. That season, Arsenal achieved the impossible. They won the Premier League without losing a single game. They won 38 games, won 26, drew 12 and lost none. A feat that, to this day, no other club has replicated in the league's modern era. And although the headlines were often dominated by Thierry Henry's goals, Robert Pires' talent and Patrick Vieira's solidity, there was one name that masterfully stitched it all together: Bergkamp. He didn't need to be the top scorer. His role was greater. His every pass was a work of art, a touch of intelligence that dismantled defenses and left teammates one-on-one with the goal. His passes seemed guided by an invisible GPS, finding Henry and Ljungberg at speed, destroying any defensive line. And it was in this way, leading the attack with his quiet genius, that Bergkamp helped immortalize the Invincibles. Arsenal lifted the trophy without knowing defeat, and Dennis, now 34, showed that class and vision of the game never age. But his impact went beyond what happened on the pitch. At that time, he was already a reference for the younger players, a master who influenced the new generation of Arsenal. A certain Robin van Persie, who had recently arrived at the club, watched Bergkamp's every move, absorbing his technique and learning that football was not just about running and shooting, but also about thinking and creating. The Arsenal Invincibles made history, and with them, Bergkamp established himself as a definitive Premier League legend. But every great story has an end. And Bergkamp's farewell to the pitch was getting closer and closer. Every great legend has their moment of farewell, but for Dennis Bergkamp, that would never mean simply leaving the scene. His impact on Arsenal was so profound that, even in the final years of his career, he still dictated the rhythm of the team, even though he played less. The 2005 to 2006 season was his last as a professional player. At 36, he was no longer a regular starter, but every time he stepped onto the pitch, he showed that his technique and vision of the game would never leave him. And nothing represented his farewell better than a special match. The first event at Arsenal's new stadium, the Emirates Stadium, was a friendly organized in his honor. But before this official farewell, Bergkamp had one last gift for the fans. In his last season, he helped Arsenal reach the Champions League final, the first in the club's history. Despite his advanced age, he was still a key player in the squad, even if he did not play in the big match against Barcelona. Arsenal lost that final, but Bergkamp's legacy did not depend on a European trophy. He had already earned the most important thing, the eternal respect of the fans. And so, on July 22, 2006, the Emirates Stadium was inaugurated with Bergkamp's farewell match. Arsenal vs Ajax, the club that revealed him. A symbolic match that brought together his origins and his peak. A packed stadium, an emotional crowd and an immortal name. Bergkamp hung up his boots, but his influence would never leave Arsenal. His style of play would continue to inspire generations. His statue, unveiled years later in front of the Emirates, would be an eternal reminder that a Dutchman, with a touch of genius, helped transform Arsenal forever. And even off the pitch, his legend lives on. Because players like Dennis Bergkamp don't disappear. They remain forever in the memory of football. Dennis Bergkamp left the pitch, but his influence on football never disappeared. For many, his absence would only be felt at Arsenal, but the truth is that his impact was much greater. He changed the way the English saw football, showing that intelligence and technique could be as lethal as strength and speed. With the end of his career, many wondered what his next step would be. Bergkamp has always been reserved, discreet, and far from the spotlight. Unlike other former players, he did not immediately seek a head coaching position. His love for the game was still there, but he wanted to teach in a different way. And so, years later, he returned to Ajax, the club that had shaped him. Not as head coach, but as assistant and mentor to the youth teams. His role? To teach young talents how to think about the game. How to see spaces where no one else could. How to touch the ball with surgical precision. And it was there, behind the scenes, that Bergkamp helped shape a new generation. During his time on the Ajax coaching staff, he helped develop players such as Frenkie de Jong, Matthijs de Ligt and Donny van de Beek. His legacy was not only a story of goals and titles, but also of knowledge passed on. But, as always, Bergkamp did not shy away from controversy. In 2017, his long relationship with Ajax came to a turbulent end. After disagreements with the board, he was fired along with other members of the coaching staff. A bitter departure for a club idol, but one that did not erase his contribution. And so, Dennis Bergkamp continued to be who he always was, a perfectionist, a football genius who never needed the headlines to be immortal. His impact was felt by every player who learned from him, by every fan who saw him play, and by every young person who grew up watching his magical moves at Arsenal. Because legends like Bergkamp do not need to be on the pitch to continue changing the game. Dennis Bergkamp has always been a man of football, but never of the media spectacle. While many former players sought the spotlight as commentators or coaches, he remained true to his essence, discreet, meticulous, and always connected to what really mattered, the game on the pitch. After his tumultuous departure from Ajax in 2017, many wondered what his next step would be. The world of football seemed open to him, but Bergkamp chose the path of silence. He didn't rush, he didn't make any bombastic statements. He simply stepped away from the spotlight and dedicated more time to his family. But his influence never faded. Arsenal, the club where he built his greatest glory, continued to honor him. His statue at the entrance to the Emirates Stadium became a pilgrimage site for fans. His name was still chanted in the stands. Every young talent who wore the Gunners' number 10 shirt knew that there was a standard of excellence to be followed, a standard set by Bergkamp. And even though he was far from top-level football, he remained involved in the sport. In rare interviews, he spoke about his vision of the modern game, criticizing its lack of creativity and its obsession with rigid tactics. For him, football should always be played with freedom and intelligence, as he did throughout his career. But perhaps his greatest legacy lies with those who grew up watching his magical moves. Robin van Persie, for example, always said that he learned the art of thinking the game from Bergkamp. Thierry Henry, his teammate during the golden days at Arsenal, called him the most intelligent player I've ever played with. And so, even without being in charge of a big club or making weekly headlines, Dennis Bergkamp remains an eternal reference. His name doesn't need to be remembered every day to be immortal. He is already etched in the history of football, in goals, assists, titles, and in the minds of all who witnessed his genius. Because greats come and go. But geniuses like Bergkamp never disappear. Time has passed, but Dennis Bergkamp's influence on football has never faded. Even though he chose a discreet life, away from the spotlight, his presence was still felt on the pitch, not physically, but in the way the game was played, in those who were inspired by him and in the clubs he helped transform. Arsenal, for example, has never had another player exactly like him. Many great players have come and gone since his retirement, but none with the same elegance, the same vision, the same coolness and intelligence to decide matches. His absence was felt, and to this day fans wonder when another player with Bergkamp's class will emerge. But modern football has also brought challenges to the legacy of past greats. In a world increasingly dominated by statistics, where a player is measured by the number of goals and assists he scores, Bergkamp represents a kind of genius that goes beyond numbers. He was not just a finisher or a waiter, he was a creator, a thinker of the game. An artist in a time when the art of football often becomes secondary. Yet his influence has remained visible. He never returned to Arsenal in an official role, but he has always been involved with the club. In the rare interviews he gave, he spoke about his vision of the game, about how he would like to see more creativity and less mechanization in modern football. His words echoed like advice from a master who had seen and done it all on the pitch. And then a new generation began to emerge. Players who grew up watching his moves, trying to replicate his technique in training, absorbing his unique way of thinking about football. And so, even away from the pitch, Bergkamp continued to shape the sport in a subtle but lasting way. Because his story was never just about goals and titles. It was about changing the way football was played. And that kind of legacy never goes away. Dennis Bergkamp's name continues to echo in football, not just among Arsenal fans, but among all those who value the art of the game. His achievements have been immortalized, his plays are still shared in videos and analyzed as if they were masterpieces. However, Bergkamp never needed constant recognition. His relationship with football has always been deeper than the search for fame. Out of the spotlight, Bergkamp continued to follow football, but in his own way. And he was always a perfectionist, someone who believed the game should be played with intelligence and style. As a result, the way modern football evolved, often prioritizing physical strength and intensity, was never exactly what he valued. He believed in thoughtful play, refined technique, perfect decision-making, something that, to him, seemed to be becoming increasingly rare. And so a new cycle began. Former teammates of his began to enter the football management scene. Thierry Henry tried his hand at coaching. Patrick Vieira ventured into the Premier League with Crystal Palace. Mikel Arteta, a player of a later generation, took charge of Arsenal himself and began rebuilding the club. And although Bergkamp did not follow this path directly, his influence was felt by these new leaders, who grew up admiring his style of play and his winning mentality. Even away from the front line, Bergkamp continued to serve as a beacon for those who saw football as he did. His philosophy of the game, his quest for perfection, his belief that the ball should be treated with respect, all of this remained alive, spread by those who admired him. And as the years passed, one thing remained certain: football would never forget Dennis Bergkamp. His legacy was assured, not just in statues or trophies, but in the memories of all who had the privilege of watching him play. Because legends don't need to be in the spotlight forever. They simply exist, eternally, in the heart of football. The story of Dennis Bergkamp, the non-flyer, is a true football legend. He not only shone on the biggest stages, but also helped redefine what it means to be a world-class player. His career, marked by magical moments and vision of the game, will forever be remembered as one of the greatest examples of technique and intelligence in the sport. For many, he will always be the player who made the difference with a simple touch, a pass, or a unique vision of the game. Today, his legacy is more alive than ever. His statue in front of the Emirates Stadium is just a physical symbol of everything he represents for Arsenal and for world football. But more than that, Bergkamp's true legacy lies in the lessons he left for future generations: the importance of creativity, patience, and technical perfection in football. And even as football has changed, even as new stars shine, Bergkamp's impact will continue to be felt. Because he was not just a player of his time. He was an artist, an innovator, a master of the game. If you've made it this far, thank you so much for watching and for taking the journey through the incredible career of Dennis Bergkamp. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to check out the previous video, where we talk about the story of Paul Scholes, another football giant. Each with their own unique style, but both leaving legacies that go beyond titles. They transformed the sport into something even more special. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories like this. Thanks everyone, and see you next time.